Today's stories all involve home, whether it's an intruder, someone watching you from outside, or a late night visitor. Joining me today is As the Raven Dreams, aka my thumbnail guy, so make sure to give him a sub if you enjoy his narrations, and sit back and relax. My memory is a little fuzzy, but this story frightened me so much that I can never forget it, and it comes to my mind now and then. I was 5 or 6, living with my parents, older sister, and brother. My sister was 16 years older than I am, and one day my parents and my brother weren't home, and my sister went to go take a shower. She told me to stand in front of the bathroom door and play because she didn't want me to be completely alone. Either that, or I told her I was scared to be alone. Don't know which one. The bathroom door was in the same hallway as our front door. The entrance was at a diagonal, and the opening of the door faced the bathroom. The door was locked. My sister double-checked it. We also had the little chain thing up. As I was standing there, the doorknob started to shake, which immediately frightened me. And to my surprise, the door opened as much as it could with the chain on it. Then a man tried poking his head through the door. The memory of how he looked is what's unclear to me now. I can't be certain anymore, but almost positive he was bald, and he was white with a pink hue to his skin, almost if he was sweltering hot or sweating or something. I don't remember seeing sweat though. His face had no expression, and he just pushed his face through the door as much as he could, and then looked at me. Didn't say a word. I was just frozen staring back at him. I was so scared I couldn't even move. I'm not sure how long it lasted. I felt as if he could have put his hand through and flipped the chain to come in if he wanted to, but he just kept staring. He stuck his hand through the door and just gripped the edge of the door. I remember his knuckles turning pink from his tight grip. At some point, I turned to the bathroom door and screamed and pounded on the door for my sister to come out. She of course did as fast as she could, and the man closed the door and left. My sister vaguely remembers this to this day as well, but she didn't see anyone when she looked out the window. I don't know what that was about, but it was creepy as hell and is one of a couple creepy memories I have from that house. I want to share this story because I talked about it yesterday for the first time. I live in Northern Europe. My country is cold and covered by a large forest and several lakes. My family consists of my mother, father, and an older brother who is 3 years older than me. He's really important in the story. It's also important to know that my parents' house is in the middle of nowhere, just forest all around. There aren't even proper roads or any streetlights. The nearest neighbor lives really far away. In my country, winter comes early and lasts longer than summer, so the days are dark almost all year round. My father's a fireman, and my mother's a nurse, so they've always been on night shifts. They have left me and my brother home alone since we were just toddlers. I don't know if it's legal to leave us alone, but my brother has always been good at taking care of me. This particular evening was close to Christmas. Both of us were on winter break, but my brother still went to ice hockey practice. He was really tired that night after practice. My father and mother had just gone to work at night and left us alone. I was 8 at the time, and my brother was 11. We often slept next to each other downstairs in our parents' bed, but I decided to be a big girl that night and sleep in my own bed upstairs. I really just wanted to play Nintendo and knew that my brother wouldn't let me. My brother was so tired after training that he just wanted to go to sleep. We ate, brushed our teeth, and went to our own rooms upstairs. My room faced the forest, and his room faced the only dirt road. There was a hall and a toilet between our rooms. My brother must have fallen asleep right away, but I played and played. I played so long that I lost track of time. I was under my covers in case my brother came to scold me. I started to hear something outside. However, I didn't pay attention to it at first. I lived all my life in the middle of this forest. You can hear what sounds like voices from there all the time. The small noises changed in a second. Someone started shouting, almost screaming. It sounded like a grown man who was wounded. I lifted my head from the covers, startled, and listened for a moment. I called out my brother's name, but he didn't answer. I got up from bed and ran to my brother's room. He was asleep soundly, so I rocked him to wake him up. At the same time, I saw from his alarm clock that it was 2 a.m. My brother woke up confused. "Did you hear that?" I asked in a whisper. My brother's eyes widened and all sleep vanished from his eyes. He sprang up, didn't say anything. He walked towards my room. The shouting was coming from somewhere in the forest. We stood together in my room and stared out into the darkness. "I think someone needs help," I said quietly, but my brother's expression didn't change. His face was like a stone. No one needs the help of 2 kids. Besides, if he needed help, he would be screaming for help. My brother turned around. He was right. I heard no words, it was just screaming. My brother walked downstairs and I ran after him. Our house has 3 doors. He tried each of them to make sure that they were locked. He took our father's headlamp because it was the strongest light. Then he picked up the house phone. He made sure all the lights were off and took my hand and led me back upstairs. Then he stopped. The shouting had changed. It no longer sounded scared or needing for help. It sounded irritated, almost angry, like it was annoyed that we didn't come out looking for it. My brother squeezed my hand and pulled me upstairs. He stared at my room for a moment and then pulled me into his room with him. He closed the door and sat on his bed, pulling me into his arms. It was dark everywhere. My brother hadn't turned on the headlamp, but he had 112 ready on the phone, our country's emergency number. We sat there in silence. The sound came closer until it was clearly behind the window of my room. Then we heard someone banging on my window. I started to sob, but my brother stroked my head to calm me down. It didn't help. I was so scared. The sound seemed to be coming closer and closer. It had climbed up the fire escape under my window and was now traveling along the rain gutters towards my brother's window. Then it became quiet. It stopped screaming, but we could hear it clinging onto the rain gutters to get closer to us. Then it was too quiet. My brother turned on the headlamp and pointed it towards the window. Nothing. He turned off the light and waited for a moment, then pointed the light at the window again. Nothing. He did the same thing. He turned it off and waited. Again, when he turned it on, nothing. But just as he turned it off the last time, there was a big crash as a pile of snow had dripped from the roof down to the terrace. My brother flashed the light on the window. There was something on it, the kind of mark that is left when you breathe too close to glass in cold weather. My brother and I immediately turned off the light. Whoever it was had fallen down because my brother's window had nothing to hold on to. We started hearing moaning. It sounded only partially human now. It sounded more like a bear. If you ever heard the sound a bear makes when it's been shot, that's what it sounded like, but it had the touch of a man. The voice became angry again. It threw a full tantrum. It started hitting the wall of the house. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my head against my brother's shirt. It raged for a while, but started to whine and moan again. It no longer sounded human at all. I can't describe what it was like, but it did not sound natural. My brother dropped his headlamp on the floor and he hugged me tightly. We listened to the sound for quite a long time. I don't remember at what point I fell asleep, but I woke up in the morning. The beautiful sun reflected against the white snow, and I was laying in my brother's bed and he was sitting next to me reading comics. He smiled at me. Had I just been dreaming? I didn't have time to say anything when I heard the lock on the front door open. It was 9 o'clock. My dad had came home. My brother cheerfully jumped out of bed and ran to greet my dad downstairs. Maybe I just had a nightmare and went to sleep next to my brother. It didn't sound impossible, especially since my brother didn't mention anything in the morning. I convinced myself that I had a realistic nightmare. I believed this for many, many years. However, that changed. My brother came to visit me yesterday. Nowadays, I live in the capital of my country, far from my mother and father, because I go to university. My brother had just broke up with his longtime girlfriend, and I promised that he could bunk at my place as long as he needed. We had a lot of fun, just like old times. We drank some wine and watched movies, and just started talking about everything. Then we started talking about deeper things, which usually happens after drinking wine. I turned to look out my window. Winter was coming and it was already dark. It brought back childhood memories. I told him about the dream I had when I was little, while I was staring at the street lamps outside. This darkness reminds me when I had a nightmare as a child, a dream that someone was screaming behind my window and I hid in my room with you. Wasn't I a strange girl? I said, as I laughed and turned to look at my brother. My brother's now 23. He is huge. He is into bodybuilding and has a blonde beard. He looks a bit like a Viking, and I've never seen a look on him like that as an adult. He looked at me with big eyes. He was pale, like he had seen a ghost. I freaked out a little. What? I asked awkwardly. You remember that? He asked. I got quiet. What do you mean? Wasn't I dreaming? I was so confused. My brother looked really startled, as if I had dug up a memory from his mind that he wanted to forget. Answer me. I thought I had a nightmare. I was getting startled too. My brother shook his head. I thought you wouldn't remember that. You were so little. I hoped you would forget. My brother looked at me blankly and told me his side of the story. He told me that I had fallen asleep in his arms from exhaustion. He put me on his bed, but he didn't fall asleep himself. He sat by my side all night like a guard dog. As the morning had begun to dawn, the sound began to fade until it disappeared. My brother still couldn't sleep. He decided to start reading comics to pass the time. In the morning when my father came home, my brother had gone out to look for tracks, but it had since snowed all night and in the morning. All the tracks were covered. For the next week, my brother would visit my room several times at night to make sure I was sleeping safely. We started talking more about what happened. Neither of us have ever mentioned what happened to anyone. I asked him why he didn't call 112, but he just shook his head. Who would have believed me? He was right. It would have sounded like a prank invented by little boys. My brother also said that he was annoyed that he didn't flash the light on the window sooner. He wanted to see what that thing looked like. I was just happy that I hadn't seen anything. I'm also happy to know that I'm not crazy. It wasn't a dream. I have a witness. My brother experienced it too and remembers it better than I do. No one else has to believe me. No one else would believe me.
So, here's my creepy encounter, which happened about a year and a half ago. My parents had left to go on a bike joyride to the shops, leaving me and my siblings alone at home. We lived in a very safe neighborhood, and the country isn't known for bad stuff happening constantly. So I, at the time, maybe 12 years old, thought that everything was going to be fine. However, at some point, we got a ring on our doorbell, and us being stupid kids who didn't listen to the "don't open the doors to strangers" opened the door. And there was a teenager there, maybe 16 to 18, who had a black backpack on. He said that he was selling something, but us being reasonably new to the country didn't really understand him. So we just said no thank you and goodbye. No big deal. However, about 10 minutes later, we get another ring. This time it's another teenager asking if our parents are home. Red flags are going off at this point, and we hurriedly mumbled something about not understanding and shut the door. Me and my younger sibling were in the upstairs room at this point, and we saw the dude who had just rang and the dude from before talking outside our house. and walking up and down it. We were understandably panicking, so we called our mom, who was luckily only a couple of streets down. When she arrived, we saw her asking the boys something, and then they left. As you can imagine, we got a pretty big telling off from our parents, but I didn't care at that point. I don't know if those guys were planning to rob us or something else, or maybe they were just being sketchy teens. But that really scared me, and I still think about it to this day.
I want to share something that happened to me when I was very little, and it still gives me chills to this day. My grandma was sick, and my parents left me and my sister at our house so they could go see her. I was 5 years old and my sister was 7, I believe. We were told to go to sleep, which we did. When it was already very late, I'm pretty sure way after midnight, I heard meowing outside of our house. I didn't think anything of it, didn't ask my sister. I just went to the front door and opened it. There were 4 men outside, and they looked at me. I remember to this day that one of them had this evil smile. Just by instinct, I understood that I was in very, very big danger, and probably within a few seconds, even though it felt like forever, I closed the door and was able to lock it. They went to grab the doorknob as I was shutting it, but did not catch it. It just happened so fast. They started breaking down the door, screaming and cursing, hitting it with their feet, shoulders, and God knows what. My sister woke up and we were so afraid. She came to me, told me to go under the bed because if they did break in, they won't know we're home and maybe they won't find us. I was too scared to tell her what I had done and that they know that I'm here. We were under there for a very long time and eventually those people left. I don't know why and after how long. We fell asleep and I stayed under the bed until the morning. When my parents came back and saw the door damaged, my sister told them someone tried to break in. I've never told anyone what I did, and I'm so scared to this day when I look back. I could have been the reason for my sister and me being killed, and I get completely horrified thinking about that night. I live in a city located in a valley with a lot of smaller towns up the hills and mountains around it. So it's part of the local culture for teenagers and young adults to visit the smaller areas during the winter to drink, smoke weed, and hang out with their friends. My uncle bought a house in one of these areas, so eventually I decided to get the keys and spend the weekend there with 5 of my friends. The house has 2 big bedrooms with 3 beds each and a lot of extra mattresses. At night, we decided at some point to go back inside and just chill and watch TV, but since the living room had no sofas yet, we brought some of the mattresses from the bedrooms and just used them. One of my friends, Victor, decided to go smoke, and after some minutes we hear someone knocking on the window just behind us. Everyone got scared for a second, but just looked at the window and said, "Oh shit, it's just Victor." But since we were sitting on the mattresses close to the ground, it wasn't easy to see clearly who was at the window. And since the person just stood there looking straight at one of the girls, I got up to go check. I saw a man who somehow looked a lot like my friend, but a bit more fat and older than him. When I came to the conclusion that it was the stranger, I froze while looking at him and him looking back at me. When I said, "It's not Victor," everyone else froze and looked at me, waiting for a reaction, but all I could do was ask what he wanted. He just stood there for a second and asked, "There's a bar nearby and we need a drummer to play in our band. Is any of your friends a drummer by chance?" Which, weirdly enough, I am, but I just told him no, and after some extra long seconds looking at us, he left. Victor came back and we made fun of the situation, making jokes on how it was him messing with us, etc. Later on, most of the group decided to sleep in one bedroom and leave the second one for me and one of the girls since they saw us kissing earlier. We all go to bed, but some hours later I wake up to the girl shaking me in horror and whispering that she heard something coming from the kitchen. Tell her to lock the bedroom when I leave to go check the sound, like the moron who always dies first in films. As I pass the second bedroom, I think about calling someone else to join me, but as soon as I see them all sleeping, I hear something at the kitchen window. I quickly move there in silence, check around, and as soon as I find and grab a knife, the door opens right in front of me. It was the same guy. I knew it was no joke since I just saw my friend sleeping. It probably took like 5 to 10 seconds of us staring at each other, but it felt like an eternity. While still holding the door handle, he made a slow movement with the other hand towards something under his shirt, which was probably a gun or knife, but I also lifted my hand, showing him the knife, so he stopped. The kitchen was quite small, so we were standing pretty close to each other, and at this point, we both knew it would end bad if he tried something. I shook my head and said as calm as I could, "Don't." He just kept staring at me for a bit more, and then finally closed the door and went away. I went back, told the girl it was nothing, and that she should go back to bed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We left early in the morning, and I made sure to ask my uncle and cousins if they ever received weird visitors there. They said the only person who ever goes there at night is the old neighbor when his wife doesn't let him in after arriving home drunk. So he grabs my uncle's rocking chair and sleeps there until he's sober. Now every year my friends talk about spending another weekend there, but I always make an excuse so we never go through that again, and I've never told them about what happened. A few years back, I was living with my aunt and uncle after moving to a new state. They had just moved into a new home in a new subdevelopment. In this area, door-to-door salesmen swarmed the new developments and new builds for water softeners, cleaning supplies, solar panels, generators, and the Kirby vacuum people. They wandered the neighborhood all day knocking on doors, but were usually gone around 5 p.m. This particular evening, I was home alone with my dog, a mutt who is mostly a black lab and an unknown mixture. He's roughly the size and weight of a full breed Labrador, but he had a stockier build and long wiry tail. He was a gentle sweet baby who was upset if someone spoke harshly to him. I'd never known him to be threatening to anyone. My aunt and uncle were out celebrating their anniversary. This time of year, the days are getting longer, and it would get fully dark by around 8 p.m. It was about 7 p.m. and starting to get dusk when someone rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. The door was one of those thick glass oval windows, and I could see the door and who was there from the kitchen. I was going to ignore them, but unfortunately, they could see me and continued to knock, so I went to go answer the door. My dog followed me, but stood off to the side in the shadows of the dining room. The person at the door was a young man, about college age, dressed in a collared shirt with a tie and khakis, looked a bit like a Mormon missionary with his style. He was thin and about my height, 5'8" to 5'9". I figured he was a salesman of some sort, but I thought it was odd that he was out this late in the day. I thought I'd open the door a crack, tell him I'm not interested, and then lock the door. I opened the door a few inches to speak through it, and he started his spiel about Kirby vacuum cleaners, and he wants to come in and give me a demo. 1. It's not my house. 2. I know once they get in, they aren't leaving without selling something, and I have no need for an overpriced vacuum, and I don't have $1,000 plus to spend anyways. I tell him, "No thank you, I'm not interested," and I begin to close the door when he puts his foot between the door and the door jamb and throws his hands up to stop the door from closing. This was when I was like, what the fuck, and I hear vicious growling behind me to my right, and then a loud, deep bark as my dog lunges for the door. I grab him by his collar to keep him from going out the door. The guy's mouth drops open, his eyes get really wide, and he looks like he's ready to pass out or pee himself as he jumps back from the door and backs away saying, "I'm sorry, wrong house," and turns and runs to the other end of the driveway where a car with 3 men pulls up and gets him. They speed off, tires squealing. I told my aunt and uncle about it when they got home, and we told a few neighbors so they could keep an eye out for unusual behavior. It's possible that they were a team of Kirby salesmen. They do travel in teams of 4 and follow the door knockers in cars with vacuums, but I was suspicious because it was too late in the day for them to be knocking on doors, and if it was a team of 4, usually they had a team with 2 or more women in the group because they are knocking on doors, and women are less likely to let a strange man in if they're home alone. So to the Kirby salesman working late to meet quotas or a team of home invaders, I don't know, but Cosmo wasn't going to take any chances. So I live with my girlfriend and a roommate, and the other night they decided to go out and leave me at the house. I'm sitting playing video games when I notice my dog growling at my glass patio door. I see a dude there and he sees me notice him, so he lightly taps on the patio door. I go out my front door because I'm not fucking opening it for him. My apartment has the entranceway to get to the front door and has a camera. His eyes are bloodshot red and he tells me that he's looking for a friend's apartment, but he couldn't seem to find it. But if he wanted to ask for directions or to see if it was a so-called friend's apartment, why not knock on the front door? Why look through my patio door? This was pretty late, but still not long after the girls had left. I've been hearing things outside lately, and now my dog is growling, but every time I open my blinds and no one's there. I might just be paranoid, but at the same time, what if it was my girlfriend who opened the door for him?
Hi everyone, my name is Leroy. I am 19 years old, and I currently live in New Zealand. I'm a student in this country in language studies. Important things to know, I'm from New Caledonia. I lived there with my parents, and so to summarize the situation, this is the first time I have lived alone. I'm in an English country, and I wasn't really good at English at the time, and finally, I didn't know anyone at the time of the story. So, it'd been about 2 weeks since I arrived. To describe my apartment to you, when you enter, you immediately come across the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen. The living room was on the roadside, so on your right when you have your back to the front door. The wall of the living room facing the outside is a bay window. The shutters are the old type, you know, the ones that go up by hand. So when you face this window, on the right there is the door to my room. The window is on the left as you enter inside. My bed has the side sticking to the window, and finally, last thing, you see the fire escapes facing the street. When we go up the stairs, we land on the balcony of my apartment. This one is therefore sticking to the glass that I described to you. So, it's around 11 p.m. when this story takes place. The cars have their headlights on. The lights from these are reflected on my window. Until then, everything is fine. I'm on my computer and I can suddenly see what is happening on my balcony. I admit that sometimes it happens to me that with the lights, I have the impression of seeing a shadow on this one. So, when I see the shadow the first time, I tell myself that it's nothing. To explain, I'm in the dark in my room, the computer on my knees, and its brightness is at a minimum. Suddenly, I see this shadow climbing the stairs. The first second, I tell myself that it's the lights. Then, I understand very quickly that the shadow is still there. I decide to look out the window, and at that moment, I realize that there is a hooded man on my balcony. I decide to lower the brightness to the minimum, and in my head I have two choices. Either I react, and I don't know what's going on, or I wait. So, I decide to wait. The guy comes up to my window and starts knocking on the window for a minute or two. I admit that, in my head, the time seemed a lot longer. So he stops, and I start stressing for me that he saw me, and that's the end. I want to remind you that I can't really call anybody, so He finishes knocking and pulls out a can of paint. He's tagged all the windows, living room and bedroom, and then he leaves. He wrote some strange letters that look like Viking characters. I don't have to clean them because I don't want to go out. I confess that as soon as he left, I stayed on my bed. I can't really understand why this happened. After a good 5 minutes, I called my mother, and since that day, I haven't heard from this guy. That's all for me. This is a story that I've told to very few people because I knew that no one would believe me. When I was 6 years old, my mother worked as a cleaning lady for a dying old woman who was a bit scary. She had hired 2 cleaning women, so my mother worked with another woman who also had a son. I got along relatively well with this other child. However, he was sometimes quite strange. In fact, the old woman really didn't like children, and I remember her asking us to be good, otherwise she would call the monster, which was obviously just a simple model on her balcony. But the other child seemed completely terrified, and I remember that I spent a lot of time winnowing at him and calling him a sissy. He told me weird stories, like the appearance of a monster at night. Just classic kid stories. It was then that one day the dying old woman told our mothers that she no longer wanted us to come, because we were rather turbulent. My mother was initially annoyed, but decided instead to call the son of a friend of hers who was unemployed to look after us. This is where the strange stories begin. This guy who watched us was called Kareem. He was between 18 and 20, but I remember him as a guy who traumatized me. His goal was clearly to scare us. However, he didn't do it in the classic way. In fact, he was doing terrifying things that, even to this day, I couldn't explain. First of all, he often told us about a dog, which he said was very naughty. I remember that the other child wanted to see it at all costs, so one day after our mothers left, leaving us in the care of Kareem, he asked us to go to the kitchen. I remember being very hesitant to follow them, and they called me a coward, and then I ended up following them. That's when he opened the fridge. However, we were in a blind spot so as to not see the inside. I heard a very strange noise, like something eating, and then he took out his bloody hands. Today, I think it's perfectly explainable that it was just a bad joke. Young me was just gullible. So Kareem was that kind of person. And when I told my mother all of this, she seemed to ignore it. It was then that one evening my mother invited the mother of the other child and Kareem to my house. That night, I had planned with the other child not to sleep, so we decided to disturb our mothers and Kareem. We made noise, we fired projectiles with toy guns, and that's where I saw him. A super tall man came from the corridor and looked at us in our room. We shouted at the man, and then he ran and disappeared. My mother heard us and had come to reassure us. We ended up sleeping in my mother's room. There was a closet in the hallway, and I don't know why, I had always linked this closet to this strange man. Anyway, even today, I really don't know what happened. It was surely a joke by Kareem, but how was it possible? Kareem was in the living room with our mothers, and above all, only me and the other child had seen this thing. I dare not especially tell this story in general, because it seems too far-fetched and false. However, I know very well what I saw. It wasn't a dream or anything. It was real. Since I had seen the same thing with the boy, and my mother had reassured me that night. I would like to have your opinion on this story. Tell me what you think, and help me to lend less importance to this thing that happened to me. Also, I don't think that it's a paranormal thing or something like that, and that's why I'm posting it here. This man was probably real, and I absolutely don't know what the hell it was.
This happened to me a year or two ago, at the then age of 15. I had a few nights when I went to bed where I heard whispers or soft muffled sounds of a group of people, like they were in another room or downstairs. At first I thought it was just because I was tired, but it happened a few more times. To be honest, it was quite terrifying. Perhaps this was just some illusion. I had a similar experience where it sounded like someone was spending hours brushing their teeth with an electric toothbrush, although nobody was in the bathroom. So I'm sitting in my living room in the pitch black darkness at 4 a.m. just on my phone, and some lady started knocking on my door saying, "Housekeeping." She did this around 3 times while I stood up and froze. Then I heard it angrily mumble something like, "Fine, call the police." Then I think I heard it march back down to the neighbor's apartment across the hall. She just moved in a couple weeks ago, and I don't know if she's tweaking or what, but now I can't sleep and I have to work in less than 4 hours. Thanks, lady. Edit. Update 1. I was late to work, and I also realized it's Sunday, so the office to my landlord is closed, and I'll have to call tomorrow. I'll check with the guy who lives below me on the way home though, to see if he's had anything happen recently. Update 2. It's about to be night 2, and I've since gotten a new Blink doorbell camera installed and talked to the neighbor below me about it. He said he hadn't seen or heard anything like that, so who knows. I haven't talked to the actual lady across the hall yet, simply because I'm nervous to, and I figured if it happens again, I'll have it on video. I forgot the landlord's office is closed on Sunday, so I'll call them tomorrow and let them know. Update 3. It hasn't even been long since I put the doorbell cam up, and I already have really creepy footage of the neighbor acting weird and staring at my door. My hands are shaking as I'm typing this. I've been staying at my aunt's house for a week or so while they are on a wife retreat with each other. All was well for the first 6 days, then I find that the back gate is wide open. Well, that would not worry me, for one, but to access this gate in particular, you have to go past a 6-foot tall sliding gate. The house is right off the road downtown, so the driveway is on the side of the house and the garage is basically in the backyard. Once you go into the big sliding gate, you pull up right in front of the garage and next to the house to get to the back door and go inside. There are 2 side gates that fence off the back area. One gate leads to the backyard and the other leads to the back door. I have not touched that one that leads to the backyard the whole time I've been here. Well, I work the night shift and I arrive home at 11:30 p.m. I get home and I know for a fact that the gate wasn't open because my dog was trying to go out that gate and I told her no and to come to the gate I was using. Well, it was about 2 a.m. when the dog started fussing and I was like, I guess I might have to go potty. So I walk outside and the dogs start barking like crazy. No big deal, they do that every time they go out. Though then I look to my left and see the second gate wide open. My heart sank because I knew I did not open that gate and it was closed when I returned not even 3 hours ago. I have called my parents and told them the situation and they're not concerned at all. I checked the entire house, all the closets, under the bed, and no one is in the house and nothing looks awry, though I am jumping at every sound their cat and 2 dogs make. I'm scared and want to leave, but I'm also scared to go outside to my car. I have very high anxiety and panic attacks, and I feel like one's coming on. I know all the doors are locked, though none of their windows have curtains, and anyone outside can easily see in. I need some reassurance. I'm sitting in the back room with all the dogs while typing this. Update. I packed all my stuff up, and I was just sitting on the couch with the dogs. I noticed police lights outside of the house in the front next to the neighbor's house. I walked outside with all my stuff, locking the front door of the house. I went over to the cops and asked them to escort me to my car because I felt unsafe. Turns out the cops were at the neighbor's house due to a report of suspicious activity. 3 men escorted me to my car and I got the heck out of Dodge. My gut was telling me that something wasn't right, and obviously something wasn't, because the cops were at my next door neighbor's house. I'm now safe, got off the phone with my brother, and almost home. It was around midnight. I was home alone sitting on the couch reading by the TV light, which is not good lighting by the way. I was struggling to fall asleep. Our couch rests up against a window with shutters that basically remain closed to keep the house cool. While I was reading, I heard a slightly playful sounding meow. I froze for a moment. I wasn't sure if I heard correctly. It was bizarre, and it was a very clear human saying meow. I remained frozen, and about 2 minutes later, I heard another booming meow come from behind me again. The window was not open, the shutters were also closed, but the voice was right behind me. A chill went through my body, starting at the base of my neck, and I sank down further into the couch until I basically melted to the floor and hid behind the front of the couch. I laid there alongside the inside lining so I couldn't be seen from any of the cracks in the shutters or through the huge backyard sliding glass door. I remained in that position until morning. I didn't move. I just lay there staring into the dark house, hoping that I'd never hear that meow again. Nobody ever confessed, but to this day it freaks me out. I'm afraid of dark backyards at night, and I always sleep with the back light on now. My bedroom is the hottest room in our entire house. In the winter, I almost have to fully cover the vent to block the heat from coming in, and I have to sleep with the window open a teeny bit to keep it from getting too hot. I have a medical issue that causes me to get violently ill if I'm overheated. When it's fall, I generally keep the bedroom windows open. They have screens on them, and they have blinds and blackout curtains, and I sleep with them open. I have a window at the front of the house and a window at the side of the house in my room. The other night, I was watching TV because I have horrible insomnia and couldn't fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps outside my window on the side of the house. There's leaves all over the ground already, so it was pretty loud. I paused my show and listened. Honestly, just figuring it was one of my roommate's dogs. I realized, unfortunately, that there was no way it was either of his dogs. The girl dog is much younger, maybe a year old, and she prances everywhere. It's pretty adorable and very distinctive since I hear her out there several times a day. His other dog was a large dog and very old, very fat, very slow moving. He generally can't even walk the distance from the back door to the other side of the house near my window. His walk is also very distinctive because he hardly lifts any of his paws when he walks. He's seriously super old. I noticed it was very clearly the steps of someone walking with 2 feet. Within seconds of me pausing the TV, the steps completely stopped. I listened for a while, but eventually turned the show back on. Eventually, I fell asleep. Just a little while after I dozed off watching TV, I was woken up by my cat frantically jumping on my head to look out the side window. He never looks out that window when I'm asleep because he can't find a way to look out that window without stepping and walking all over me. His tail was puffed out and his hair on his back was slightly raised. I've rarely seen him do this. In fact, he's only acted like this one time towards an animal, and that was a cat we brought into the room and allowed to eat from his food bowl. He looks out the open window all the time. He loves seeing other animals. This took me from scared to absolutely freaked out. I paused the show again. It was unmistakably human steps outside my window again, only this time they didn't stop when I paused the TV, and they definitely weren't trying to be quiet. I heard them take several steps and the sound faded towards the front of the house, confirmed when my cat launched himself across the room to look out the other window. I heard what sounded like a car door shut and nothing more since. I called the police and 2 of them searched outside with their flashlights and the other one drove around shining the spotlight in the neighborhood. Here's hoping whoever this is doesn't come back. I'm gonna get some cameras as soon as I can and put them outside my window so that I can find out who this is and have them stopped. We moved into a suburban house in the southern US a few years back. When the pandemic hit, I found myself working remotely. It was great since I spent more time with my family and didn't have to spend 2 hours in traffic. However, being home a majority of my week exposed me and my family to a variety of strange encounters that have only escalated through the years. Early in the pandemic, we got a knock on our door mid-morning. I was in a meeting, but I heard my partner open the door. I could tell by the voice that it was our next door neighbor, an older woman who lived alone. She was in the process of moving and had stopped by every day or so to give us a few odds and ends that she didn't want to take with her. However, within seconds, my partner called my name with a worried tone. I excused myself from the meeting and I head over to the landing, which is open to the front door below. Both my partner and neighbor look slightly panicked. My neighbor says, "There's a strange man sitting on our back wall. What do we do?" For context, my house is on a green belt. There's about 500 yards of woods and field until you hit a 4-lane road and a small shopping plaza. Our back wall is smooth, concrete, and is about 6.5 feet high. The ground on the greenbelt is sloped, which ends up making the wall about 7 feet high on the greenbelt side. A taller person with considerable effort could probably scale it. I initially think there's no way that someone's up on that wall right now, but sure enough, I run downstairs and look through the back sliding glass door. There's a middle-aged man smoking a cigarette with both feet hanging into my yard. He's kind of lazily staring at the back of mine and my neighbor's houses. My adrenaline starts kicking in. My kids' swing set and toys are in the backyard. I hate confrontation, but I seem to be automatically moving to open the back door. My partner asks, "What are you doing?" I open the door and step out onto the porch and start walking across my yard. As I get closer, I can tell that this guy is bugging and is probably homeless. He notices me when I get about 6 feet away from him. I'm trying to stay calm and not to escalate. "Hey man, what are you doing up there?" He gestures around, enjoying the view. I interrupt him. "Yeah, you gotta get down and go somewhere else." He kinda just stares at me and swings his leg over to the other side and stays put. "Please get the fuck off my property," I say more forcefully this time, trying to hide any wavering in my voice. Yeah, okay." He slides the other leg and jumps down, disappearing from view. Never saw that person again, thankfully. A few months later, I'm still working from home. My partner and kids are gone, so I'm alone. There's a knock at the door. Usually I ignore them unless I'm expecting someone. Most of the time, it's either Amazon or a solicitor. They usually knock once and then take off. However, this person leans on the doorbell and knocks again. Annoyed, I leave my office to go see who it is. I make my way to the door and can hear a muffled conversation taking place on the other end before I can look through the peephole. I get to the door and look out. I see 4 people all dressed like they're heading to a business lunch. 2 men in their mid-20s, an older man, and a young woman towards the back who couldn't have been more than 20 or 21. I slowly open the door out of courtesy, and the older man immediately gets uncomfortably close to me and starts speaking forcefully in a foreign language. I didn't understand. It takes my brain a moment to catch up. "I can't understand," I start to say. He pauses and says in English, "You can't speak Russian?" I reply no. Then there's a long moment where we kind of stare at each other. He looks like he doesn't believe me and is glaring. "Where's the nearest Russian church?" he asked, while the others stand there silently behind him. I have no clue. I generally had no idea if such things exist in southern USA. He thanks me, then they all walk back to their nondescript sedan and take off. They didn't stop at any of their houses on the street. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate. It's a pretty rundown building with only 12 units and 3 floors, including the basement. The security is pretty much non-existent. Both the front and the back doors to the building don't lock properly, and to be honest, anyone could probably break down the unit doors with just their body mass. The walls in the apartment are paper thin. You can hear anything and everything, which makes talking about anything personal a little off-putting. I'm someone who locks the door behind me immediately when I enter the apartment or my car. I'm wary of people due to some trauma in the past. After living here for a few months, I felt pretty secure. My neighbors are all kind and normal, from what I could tell. People generally keep to themselves, and my floor is quieter than the others. I mostly never see anyone in the hallways. One day, I was home alone in the bathroom. The knob handle on the door in the bathroom does not have a lock on either the outside or on the inside. When I went to open the door to get out of the bathroom, I couldn't turn the knob. I immediately started panicking and thinking the worst possible reasons for why the doorknob wasn't turning. It was as if the knob was frozen. It wouldn't even jiggle the normal way a locked door would. I regrettably didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't even call my roommate to come help. I started trying to open the door, and after 2 or 3 minutes of pacing in a very small bathroom, I tried again, and the door opened normally. Some time had passed and nothing else strange happened until a few months later. I was home alone again and used the bathroom. This time, I was showering and expecting my partner to come over at some point. When I was out of the shower drying off, I heard footsteps past the outside of the door and a bedroom door open, either mine or my roommate's. They are right next to each other right outside the bathroom. I figured it was my partner, so I continued to take my time. When I reached for the door handle, it was frozen again, and I was locked inside the bathroom. I started pounding on the door, hoping whoever was there, my partner or my roommate, would hear and come help. When the door did this, it was almost like there was pressure being put on the other side of the handle. At this point, I'm nervous that whoever I heard is not someone I know. I had pounded on the door so hard I dented it, to give you an idea of how fragile they are. After some aggressive pounding on the door, it finally opened. Of course, there was no one I could see in the apartment. My partner wasn't there, nor was my roommate. I immediately called my roommate to ask if they had come into the apartment to grab something, hoping that I was just ultra paranoid. They told me that they hadn't, and I explained the situation. They gave me permission to search their room. I did so very nervously. I checked every closet, under the beds, and the couch to make sure that no one was hiding. I don't really know what I would have done if I found someone, but I knew I had to check or I wouldn't feel safe. Again, a few more months passed and nothing had happened to either my roommate or myself. She has never experienced the door locking, and I've only experienced it happening while no one else was home. This past weekend, my family came to pick me up for a wedding. When they dropped me off in the evening, they came inside to use the bathroom and check my apartment out. They didn't live nearby. My dad was examining things the way dads do, and he was looking at the bathroom door quizzically. I decided to tell him the weird story about being locked in there a few times, nonchalantly. I wasn't as shaken up about it anymore, and since so much time had passed, I just assumed that it might be the latch to the door. My dad, who is pretty paranoid himself, didn't like those stories and examined the latch and the doorknob. He said they looked fine to him, and it must have got stuck from the heat or something. Get this, that very night I was locked in that bathroom again. It felt like an eerie coincidence to me, given that I had just spoken out loud about the occurrence, and I'm always worried about what people might hear outside the apartment. I told my roommate about this occurrence last night. We talked about what could possibly have caused it, theorizing what or who it could be. I even noted that I felt uneasy talking about it out loud, and she agreed. That night, I woke up to really loud pacing in the hallway outside of our unit door at around midnight. I went out to make sure our doors were locked. They were. The pacing continued for over an hour. Unfortunately, my unit doesn't have a peephole, so I can't safely look at what's going on. Could be entirely unrelated, but it's certainly abnormal behavior for folks in the building to be lurking the halls late at night. What do you think? Should I be more concerned, or am I just ultra paranoid? This happened yesterday and is a pretty short story. For starters, I have been home alone with my sister for a week now, since my parents went on a trip. I was in the living room on the bottom floor watching TV around midnight when I heard something make a loud thud on our winter garden window, which is facing the living room. It scared the crap out of me, so I just jumped up and went to go tell my sister. Eventually, I got the courage to grab a kitchen knife and went to go look if someone was around the house. I didn't find anyone, but it still scares me. Update: it's been some time since I posted about the event. My parents have been home for a while now. Today, my dad called me downstairs and showed me that someone tried to get in through the door with a crowbar in the winter garden, where I heard that thud. I am now fairly sure it wasn't a bird. Before I tell my story, you need to hear some key information. My brother, his girlfriend, and I all play airsoft on the weekends, and I sleep naked. I was home alone as my mother was at her parents' house. I was 14 at the time, and I was living in a weird and not so good neighborhood. Surely not the type of people who murder, but the type of people where you'd have to check everything was locked twice to feel like you were safe. Luckily for me, when I came back from airsoft with my brother and his girlfriend, I locked the doors and windows, but I forgot that I had burnt something in the oven earlier and had to keep one of the kitchen windows open. I live only with my mother and my German Shepherd, who is an actual monster. Around 3 in the morning, I heard my dog bark viciously near the kitchen window, and what I've known over the years, if my dog is barking that viciously, I knew it had to be something bad. I put on some underwear and got my gun off the wall, walking towards the kitchen. I turned on my lights to find a man wearing black clothes and night vision goggles. He was half in and half out the kitchen window, wiggling like a worm. It's a tough window to get into. The window was about eye level. I cocked the gun ready to fire and said, "Get the fuck out of my house, bitch!" He stared at me completely confused, considering he had just been caught by a 14-year-old boy wearing just underwear and aiming a rifle towards him. He looked panicked at the fact that the rifle was aiming straight at him. He quickly rolled out of my window and ran into the nearby woods. I called the police and reported the guy with every detail I saw of the man. A week later, a girl went missing. She was home alone and there was no sign of forced entry. The man has since been caught for sexual assault and the murder of 2 children just 2 streets away. In his police interrogation, he confessed stalking the children by watching them in their houses at night, and he used night vision goggles.